Hi, everybody. It's me again. Before we get to another fabulous, terrific, wonderful interview, please do us a favor and subscribe. That would really help us out. Now, let's get to that interview. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Opinionated. Really excited today. I've got actor Saul Rubinek with me. So welcome, Saul.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I was really excited to have you on. I've been a fan of yours most of my life, I think. You've been doing this a while.
I have.
Yeah, for me, I think the what I remember seeing you in first, and I've seen you in a ton of stuff since, was Hill Street Blues, an episode of Hill Street Blues.
Oh my God. You probably remember it better than I do.
Yeah. That was kind of my show. I was I was probably a young teenager at that time. So I was kind of, it was kind of edgy at the time.
How you even remember that it was me in that show, I have no idea. I think it was, must have been in the early 80s, right?
Yeah, I was thinking early to maybe 83, 84, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I had only come to America to the United States from Canada, like about 4 or 5 years before that. And I was going back and forth between my hometown of Toronto and my new hometown of New York. And I'd go wherever the work was. And going back and forth, I remember I had a green card, so I was allowed to work, and I got an agent. And it was kind of like starting all over again. I was a little bit of a big fish in a smaller pond in Toronto. I'd been doing theater since I was a little kid. And then had only just started doing television, like around 1976 or so, 77, in Toronto for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is kind of like American PBS or the BBC. And then I wanted, I was ambitious, and I had an opportunity to be able to work. So I came to New York, and I remember it was really hard to get an agent because I had like 5, 8, 9 leading roles on CBC, but I had come to New York at a time when it's hard to remember a time like this, but the agents didn't have a VHS machine in their office. And it was just the transition, was it going to be beta? Was it going to be VHS? And I had a what was called a 3/4 inch tape, which is an amalgam of different movies I'd done. And I remember the agent that I'd gotten a recommendation to, who eventually became my agent, wonderful agent. We had to rent a room, or I had to rent a room, with a 3/4 inch machine so she could see my work. Things changed pretty much right after that. By 78 or 79, everybody had a VHS machine in their office. But I remember how hard it was to show people my work. Of course, these days people do a self-tape and put it online, and people hit a link and they can see what they want to see. Yeah.
It's funny because I remember when we got our first VCR. I mean, that was a big day. You get that first, of course. Yeah, I also remember when we got cable, which was also a big day. It was like
I remember.
It was like TBS. That was it.
I remember getting a television. It was a big deal for us. I mean, we were an immigrant family. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and I was born in a refugee camp. In 1949, we didn't come to Canada until I was 9 months old. My dad worked in a factory. There was no money. I remember getting a TV, or actually going to a neighbor's apartment to see TV for the very first time. That was a big deal. Who knew I would ever end up on TV? Anyway,
well, that's a good. I was going to ask you. That's a good place to start. How did you end up becoming an actor? What made you want to do that?
My dad had been an actor in the Yiddish theater in Poland before. I always thought, as a little boy, I thought there was an evil king called Hitler who decided to go to war to stop my father from doing Yiddish theater. That was what my impression of the world was, which maybe is not such a wrong, maybe that's actually kind of true, turns out. Anyway, my dad was a very young person in a very religious family. He cut off his payas, which are the Orthodox side curls, and he was part of a generation in Eastern Europe of Jewish people who didn't want to be ghettoized and wanted Paris or New York or London as a mecca, especially for artists. And he had dreams. He was only 16 or so, and he broke away and started to become an actor. And then when he came to Canada and had a little baby, and was an immigrant with no money, there was not much English, of course, that was out of the question. He had to work like all immigrants do, whatever job they could get to support their family. And I didn't grow up speaking English, really, kind of Yiddish and French. I was in Montreal, street French and kind of Yiddish and a smattering of English. And my dad got a better job in Ottawa, and I moved to a new community, and I was in fights all the time because of my language and stuff, and they didn't know what to do with me. I had a little friend, a little bit older than me, who was in children's theater. We was a neighbor. Still friends with him now. He's, in his mid-70s. Anyway, he was 9 and I was 6 or something. And I thought he was the best person I'd ever met in my life. He was a little gymnastic, funny kid. Just could do, his body could do like a rubber band. And I remember he would open shows with a very tall guy and open children's theater shows, and just being up on stage. I admired him so much. And then they had the Ottawa Little Theater had theater classes. They were free for boys. Why free for boys? Well, if you go back to 1956 or so, if you were taking theater classes, you were queer. If you were a boy, there were all this homophobic stuff, right? And boys just didn't do that. They were into sports or whatever they were into, and so there were thousands of girls who would take these classes, very few boys. And when my parents found out that it was free for boys, and they didn't know what to do with this kid who was getting into fights all the time, they just sent me there. I was 7 or 8, and I already admired my friend Bobby, who was this little gymnastic actor kid. And it was really interesting. There were these 2 wonderful British women, and they were teaching children the art of the drama. Both of them were Royal Academy of Dramatic Art graduates. Both of them in Canada, because they're British. Their husbands, I think, worked for the British High Commission or some kind of British thing, and they were stationed there, or they were working in Ottawa, the capital of the country. And to do something with their time, they taught. It was very, very lucky. They were wonderful women. Faith Ward, I remember her name was, and Barbara Meiklejohn, wonderful people who mostly just gave us a love of theater. And the way I describe it, people have asked me this question before, is that I got thrown into water and I didn't know that I was a fish. I had no idea I could breathe underwater, that I had gills, until I was in the midst of these children. And it was something about the storytelling, and that I'd kind of, I guess, got genetically through my dad, who was a great storyteller and a very funny guy, and a wonderful actor, really, that I fell in love with it. And I never left that water, I guess, is the best way to put it.
I actually love that story. That's you're a pretty good storyteller. That was pretty good. You've written, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but you've written a book, maybe a documentary about your parents.
But in 1986, I was having a lot of trouble with my parents because I had a non-Jewish girlfriend, and I didn't know how to get back together with them. And anyway, what drew us together was there had been a letter from this. My parents had been in contact with these people in Poland that had hidden them, these Polish farmers in a little town, a little village, who had hidden my very young parents for 2.5 years from the Nazis. And my parents, poor as they were and middle class income, never above that, but always sent them money whenever they could, and had been writing them and supporting them as best they could for many, many years. And this was now 40 years later. I was in my mid-30s, and they wanted to see my parents again. And I had a very good friend who was a documentary cinematographer that I'd worked with in dramatic stuff, actually. His name was Vic Sarin. And Vic said, let's go to CBC. I think that they would finance. I was well known at this point by the middle 80s in Toronto. They would probably finance us doing a documentary of your parents' reunion with these people. wouldn't have cost a lot. We sold it on the spot, like in 1 minute. And I remember financing half of it. Believe me, it wasn't a lot of money. The whole thing was 20 grand. I think I put up 10 grand, and we had a crew of 3 or 4. And in 1986, it was still communist Poland. We brought a little crew over there, and we spent 2 weeks, and we shot this reunion of my parents never having been back to the village where they first fell in love, and having been hidden, and the farmer and the farmer wasn't alive, but her son was now 50. He had only been 6 years old when they were hidden there. And this woman who was in her 80s at this point. And we shot that documentary called So Many Miracles, and it's available if people want to find it. It's at the National Center for Jewish Film, which holds the distribution rights. You could probably get a DVD of it.
Yeah.
It's about an hour long, but it's played all over the world. And at the same time as I did that, I had been interviewing my parents because of the troubles we'd had over this non-Jewish girlfriend. I'd been interviewing them, trying to find a way back together. And I wrote a book based on those interviews, also called So Many Miracles. And the book was published by Penguin of Canada, and I think published also in what's called the British Commonwealth. That means, Canada, England, New Zealand, Australia. And around the same time the documentary came out, I'm talking about 1987 or so.
Yeah.
And the book came out, and a documentary came out, and it was really a galvanizing event. I didn't know at that time that I was going to have kids, right? And I met my wife Eleanor right after that. We've been together for over 32 years, but my kids are 30 and 26 now, and I didn't know what effect that would have on my family, having made that documentary. And recently, you get a scoop here. Recently, over the last 3 years, I wrote a play called All in the Telling. And that play is very personal. It's about my family, 3 generations of my family. It's about the making of that documentary film and the writing of that book.
Love it.
And all the behind the scenes stuff that happened with my, wife and with my parents, the drama of it and the comedy of it, and how making that documentary eventually affected 3 generations of my family, including my daughter, and what happened to her, which is something my play reveals that I can't reveal here. But so I wrote that play, and now I'm trying to get it on. And so that event has continually affected my life and my children's lives in ways I could never have imagined.
Yeah, that's amazing, and what a tribute for your parents. How did they respond to reading it?
I don't think that I don't think they would have gone to Poland if it wasn't for the fact that they were protected by a documentary film. And I think this is true of a lot of people who have gone through war and trauma, of revisiting where they've lost so much. It's such a nightmare to have that revisited, but they felt protected even by a small documentary crew. And they felt protected by the context of the fact that they were going to tell their story to other people. And that gave them a reason to go. And ultimately it brought me and my parents very close together. It was a way for them, once the film was made, it was a way for them to show people what they'd gone through, because it's only an hour-long documentary, and they're really quite moving. I was one of the great things that I was involved in my life. And as I said, it was I didn't know how deeply it would affect everyone. Yeah, it was a big thing for them in their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's terrific. What would they think about the Hunter show that you're doing now?
Well, my dad would always be happy that I was making a living. Just this ridiculous profession. He was always worried about me. Maybe you should be a director. Maybe that's easier. Or get a nose job, maybe, if you're going to be an actor. But he was very nervous about me being in this business. He was always happy if I was making it. So the first thing wouldn't have been about what the show was about. The first thing would have been that I was working with Al Pacino, and that I was, that I somehow was making a living. That would have been great for him. And I think he would have been happy about a show where, I was playing a survivor, and he would have been happy that it was telling a story, even if it was in a very imaginative Well, he would have been thrilled, no question about it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's terrific, and we're getting season 2 at some point this year, right?
you are, yeah.
I'm excited to see that. So you are the first guest that I've had, and we've done, I think we're in the 350s or so now, but you're the first guest I've had. When I have somebody on, I go to everybody in the family. I'm like, where have you seen this person from? What do you know them from? First time my mom and dad have ever answered the question together. So that's pretty good. So I'm going to give you the 2 that they know you from with that. So with dad, it was Jesse Stone.
Yep.
Although he knew Untouchable once I brought it up. And he's like,
not
oh,
Untouchable, yes. Not Untouchables. No, some other show. But
yeah. Untouchables is the Sean Connery one about and Kevin.
Yeah, I wasn't in that one.
No, that's not the one I was meaning. I was meaning Unforgiven. I just said
Unforgiven, right.
Yeah. So he knew you from that one once I brought that up, which is, in my opinion, one of the best Westerns ever. It's such a good.
And your mother knew me from Frasier, right?
She did. How'd you know that?
I don't know. I can usually tell what people know me from. People are coming up to me on the street, and I can tell from the way they look. It's Frasier, or it's Star Trek, The Next Generation. It's Unforgiven, or it's True Romance, and it's always one of those. Usually one of those. Jesse Stone is new. I love doing Jesse Stone. That was really really fun playing that character. I loved working with Tom Selleck on that show, and actually shot in Halifax, a great town. But that's pretty cool. Well, that's just a testament to how old I am and how many things I've done in my life. I'm two degrees to just about everybody, but I've worked with a lot of people. And I started doing theater when I was 8, and I started doing television. I guess I was about 26 or 27. So it's a long time, and I've never done anything else in my life. I'll tell you the thing I just did that your audience may not know about because it isn't released, and my father really would have been proud of. And it has to do with, very topical, it has to do with Ukraine. Last summer, I was asked by an old friend of mine who's a French producer who had a production company in Ukraine before the invasion. And he said, look, we're building a shtetl. A shtetl is a Yiddish word for village. There were thousands of them all throughout Eastern Europe, mostly, surrounded by little Ukrainian or Polish or whatever kind of non-Jewish villages, little tiny little towns. And there were many hundreds and hundreds of Jewish ones, which were all destroyed. He said, we're building one in Ukraine, just north of Kiev. And we have a film, we're going to make a film 100% in Yiddish, in the Yiddish language. It's going to take place in 1941, just before the Germans invaded. Operation Barbarossa was called, when the Germans turned on the Russians and invaded Ukraine and Russia. And he said, in this little village life, and I want you to play the rabbi of this village. And I traveled to Ukraine. It's not the first time I'd been there. I was there in 2015, right after the Maidan Revolution. I had made a film, a little children's film, French language, English-French film. So I'd spent a couple of months there in 2015. But this was really special. My father would have really, in a way, was to honor my father. Of course, I'm sure my relatives not only come from Poland, but from all over Eastern Europe, including Ukraine. And it was really something. They built this whole village. God knows if the Russians have destroyed it, if the war has destroyed it. It was delegated by Zelensky and the Ukraine government as a museum because of its authenticity. It's really beautiful. It's called Shtetl, S-H-T-T-L, without the E. Usually it's S-H-T-E, but the letter E is removed. There was a French novel written many years ago, and the writer of this film said in that novel, to symbolize all the dead and all the missing, he took the letter E out of every word in the novel. It was just missing. And it was quite a wonderful, and he wanted to honor that extraordinary symbol, and he called the film Shtetl without the E, and it was S-H-T-T-L. And it'll come out in a year or so. It's a Ukraine film made by the country of Ukraine.
Amazing.
And so I'm very proud of having made that. I'm hoping it'll probably be at one of the festivals coming up. And you ask what my father would be proud of Hunters, but he really would have been proud of that, because I still speak Yiddish and I can still get by in it. and there were a few Yiddish speakers who helped me get better at it, who were on the film. But that whole film is in Yiddish, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. I will look forward to that, but I'll probably have the subtitles on.
No, the subtitles are on. Yeah.
No, it's pretty great. Now, my mother has recently discovered Frasier. So she calls me one day and she's like, "Have you seen this Frasier show?" And I'm like, "Yes."
Yeah, me and 200 million people have seen it. Yeah. It was a great series. We still watch it as a family, as comfort food. Sometime we're eating together. We haven't been able to choose a movie. We're all arguing about what movie to watch, and eventually my son will say, "Oh, let's just watch an episode of Frasier," and then, holy shit, wait, I'm on that show. That's me. You tend to forget. Although I did almost 2 years ago, I did maybe almost 20 episodes.
I know. Yeah, she just watched The Wedding, or the Left at the Altar. She loved that episode.
Yeah, it was great.
Are you coming back? Because the show's coming back.
Oh, I have no idea. I doubt it. I have no idea. I don't even know that the word is out what it's going to be about, or how many of the original cast. I imagine it'll be a completely new cast in a new city.
I can make them phone calls.
Okay.
Back on there.
All right.
No, that's terrific. I know I've kind of followed your career growing up, but you were on a show with Ted Danson. It's called Inc. And I always thought that show deserved a better chance because I think it only lasted one season.
Yeah, it was only one season. It was really fun. I had already done. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember because I worked with Ted 3 different times. One was a movie with Macaulay Culkin, a kind of Home Alone kind of movie called Getting Even with Dad that I made with Ted Danson, and Macaulay Culkin was only 12 or 13 at the time. So that's got to be 20 some years ago. And right around the time of Inc., which was 1996, 97. And then I directed Ted in my first movie, which was as a director, which was a movie called Jerry and Tom, which you could
that's a good movie.
Your viewers could see. It's a very fun movie written by a great writer and a great cast, and Ted was in that movie. So yeah, I did do Inc. It only lasted 1 year, and I don't think the ratings were quite high enough there. They make these kind of deals about viewership in those days, about you have to reach a certain point and that's guaranteed a second season, or those decisions that are made in those offices have always been beyond me.
I did mean to mention that my mother also remembered you from The Equalizer. That was one of her favorite shows back then, and she said he was on there too.
I had to pay the rent, and I did a lot of different jobs, and I did a lot of different series, and I always treated them. I'm proud of the fact that I always treated them as if I was working on a Martin Scorsese film. I never, no matter what the show was, I worked really hard on it. I remember even The Equalizer, I had a character that I helped invent, some head of a spy agency that I modeled after the people that I knew that were young executives in the studios. And I remember doing that. Oh, man, I remember the reason. It's a tragic reason I remember it, because I remember being in New York and going to shoot one morning, and that was the Challenger disaster. So I remember at lunch, we were all could barely shoot. Right in the middle of that Equalizer shoot was the Challenger thing, and that's probably the main reason I remember that, working on that show, whatever that was. Was that 1986 or 85?
I think, 86. Yeah, we watched that at school. That was one of those they rolled that into the the classroom to watch the launch, and then that happened. Yes, that's how I remember.
Well, because there was a school teacher on board, and it was terrible. Yeah. So I did a lot of those. I did a lot of shows, a lot of different things. Recently, I've recurred a few times on Mrs. Maisel, and that was really fun to do.
Yeah.
And the series Billions a few times. That was really fun to do. So I keep cropping up here and there.
I know you pop up all over the place.
Well, I never want to retire. Mostly I spend my time during COVID writing. I've been working on different ideas for series with my wife, who's a producer, and my son, who's a writer, and my daughter, who's an actor and a writer, and we work together as a family. So that's really kind of cool. So yeah,
that's pretty great. And I could go down the list and just mention you a bunch, but you brought up Next Generation, so I'll throw that in there. The Most Toys, I believe, was the episode.
Well, that's a really interesting story. I had Brent Spiner, who plays Data on that show, and I had worked together in theater in New York in 1979. And this was the second season of that show. And I actually was only going to come out to visit the set. I was visiting in LA, and a friend of mine who I'd known since childhood was a director of that show. His name is Tim Bond, and it was his second episode directing that series. And I'd met him on the plane on the way to LA, and he said, I'm directing an episode of this new series, although it's the second season, called Star Trek Next Generation. I said, of course, yeah, because an old friend of mine, Brent Spiner, is on that show. He said, well, you should come visit the set. I said, sure. I said, give me a few days, to get my feet wet and the actors going, but maybe next week after the weekend. And I was staying at a friend's house, and in those days we didn't have cell phones and texting, and it was 1989, I think. And I got a call at 2 a.m. at my friend, who wasn't happy to be awakened. And my friend Tim said, how badly do you want to visit the set? Anyway, it was a sad story. Their guest star had tried to kill themselves.
Oh, no.
And had not succeeded in doing so, but eventually did. And Brent suggested that I was in town, and would I do it? And it meant me going at Sunday, 2:00 a.m, getting in a car and driving to the Paramount and getting refit for costume, makeup, and create this character. All the producers had agreed. I had some reputation at that time, so they just cast me. And it was mostly a two-hander with me and Brent. And that's how I ended up doing that role. And I got to pay him back in a way, because I did a series I'm very proud of called Warehouse 13. And if your viewers
that was my next question, because you did some writing on there too.
No, I didn't do any writing on Warehouse 13.
Okay.
But I did help convince the showrunner to cast Brent Spiner in the 4th season, and who played my nemesis. And so Brent and I got to spend 2 or 3 months together working on Warehouse 13. I still see Brent every now and then, and certainly see him at sci-fi conventions in the past few years before COVID. And so I got to work with Brent again. Great joy to work with Brent, a great actor, and one of the funniest, nicest people I've ever worked with in the business. So that was really cool. Yeah, I've had the great good fortune. Thanks for reminding me of all the great. I've had a great life and wonderful friends, and I've had a fascinating career. I've never had to have a job. Let me put it that way. My work is what I love to do, and there have been some tough moments and times when you're out of work and times when you never know if you're going to work again. It's the life of an artist. It always has been. But I've been fortunate. I've been really fortunate. I've worked on some great stuff, and with wonderful people, and I still like telling stories. So
yeah, it's pretty. That's not a terrible career. That's pretty good.
No,
pretty good.
Great.
I'll give you a quick Brent Spiner story. So we're my son and I, who he does all the hard stuff for the podcast, the editing and stuff. We are friends with his assistant. So when he goes to a show, we would go and talk to her. Of course, he's sitting there. So the first time that we did that, we went up, talked with her, and kind of hung out there, while he's signing autographs and stuff. But everywhere we went that entire weekend, we kept running into him. So it was like out to dinner, in the break room. He went to the bathroom. It was just chance. But eventually he got to the point, he was like, you guys again? Get out of here.
That's funny.
Yeah, he's a terrific guy, just a terrific guy.
Yeah.
Well, Saul, thank you so much. This is
okay.
It's been a blast. We could talk forever. You've got plenty of things to talk about, but this has been a real honor speaking with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. A couple quick things before you go. Anything else you're working on that we can keep an eye out for?
Well, as I told you, the most recent thing is the Schitt film, and I'm working on trying to get my play on. And so those are 2 big things that are happening for me. But you never know. The
That's
life
right.
of an actor can change in an hour.
Change very quickly. Are you on social media? And if so, where can we find you?
When I've got a show on the air and I'm trying to help advertise it, I go on Instagram and I go on Twitter, but I'm there on Instagram. I'm there on Twitter. You can find me. Just my name you'll find me there. So, but I'm not trying to sell anything. I mean, normally I stay off that world because I'm not, I don't want to open myself to the kind of harangue that I know that there are wonderful people out there who just want to say hello, but there are also trolls out there who want to come at me, and I really don't have time for it. I really would like to spend my time creatively, unless I've got an obligation. I'm proud of a show or something. And certainly I was on a lot when Hunters opened, and I was on Twitter and I was on Instagram a lot, and of course, producers and the network wants you to do that, and I don't blame them. I was proud of the show and wanted to give it as much notice as I could. So yes, I'm on social media, but please don't expect responses from me.
You're not on there just posting pictures of your dog or something like that, like everybody else.
Yes, every once in a while, I have to admit. But.
All right, sir. Hang on 1 second. That was a lot of fun. So that was the talented Saul Rubinek. Really happy to have him on the show. And that was a little shorter interview than we do at times, but I thought we had some really good stuff there. We could spend hours talking about all the different shows that he's in. And I really did think that he wrote for Warehouse 13. So I learned a little something there. But I loved him in Curb Your Enthusiasm. He was Dr. Saul Funkhauser, NYPD Blue, The Practice, LA Law. He's been on everything. Boston, the Legal, Blue Bloods, Andrew Tribeca, all that stuff. I can just keep going. It's just an amazing career. And I can't believe I got Untouchables and Unforgiven mixed up. That's terrible. But Unforgiven, one of my favorite Westerns ever, and he was amazing in that. And I'm sure you've seen that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in again this week. I definitely do not take that for granted. I'm a little under the weather this week, so I appreciate you hanging in there with me. You could really help us out if you would go to our website, meistercon.com, or to our YouTube channel, MeisterCon Pod, and subscribe. We would really appreciate the help. We want to keep bringing you these great interviews. I think we're in the 350s, somewhere in the 350s. So there's plenty of stuff there for you to listen to or to watch. Till next time, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.